Welcome to The Explainer. Sometimes to really get your head around a huge, complicated historical event, you have to zoom in. I mean, way in. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're looking at the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, but through the story of just one place, the village of Tarshiha. So that brings us to the big question for our explainer today. How can the story of a single community, what happened to its people, its land, really act as a key to unlock a conflict that completely redrew the map of a region? We're going to look for the answers in the details, the human stories, the military plans, and the political aftermath. The sources we're drawing from really present Tarshiha as a perfect microcosm of the whole 1948 conflict. Its story seems to have it all. The brutal military fight, the devastating human toll, and the massive demographic shifts that defined what Palestinians call the Nakba, which translates to the catastrophe. Okay, so to really grasp what changed, we first have to understand what was there to begin with. Let's go back in time, before the war, when Tarshiha was known by this really beautiful name. They called it the Bride of the Galilee. And let me tell you, this was not some sleepy little village. This was a vibrant, thriving Palestinian hub for culture and for commerce. But its location, right there between the key towns of Safad and Acre, well, that strategic position would ultimately play a huge part in its fate. Let's put some numbers on this. Just 3 years before the war kicked off, a 1945 census gives us this really clear snapshot. The population was more than 5,300 people. And here's the crucial part. Every single one of them was Palestinian. That's our before picture. Then, 1947 happens. The UN steps in and draws up its partition plan. On that map, Tarshiha was set to be inside the borders of the new Arab state. But when the Arab world rejected the plan, the village's future was suddenly up in the air, and it immediately became this key piece of territory in the conflict that was about to erupt. And that conflict, it arrived with incredible force. So now we have to turn to the military operation that would change Tarshiha forever. Operation Hiram. So, what was Operation Hiram? Well, it was this massive, lightning-fast, 3-day offensive by the Israeli army. The official goals, according to the military records, were to capture the whole Upper Galilee and to crush the Arab Liberation Army, which had actually set up its regional headquarters right there in Tarshiha. But if you dig into the documents from that time, it seems there was a much broader strategic goal at play. About a month before the operation, Israel's Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, is quoted telling his cabinet that if fighting started up again, the Galilee would become, in his words, clean and empty of Arabs. He added that he'd been given assurances of this by his commanders. And that directive? It was backed by some serious firepower. In just one night of the operation, Israeli planes, including these huge, repurposed World War II B-17 bombers, just unleashed an incredible aerial assault. They dropped 21 tons of bombs on Tarshiha and the villages around it. The effect on the people on the ground was immediate and absolutely catastrophic. The sources are very clear on this. The bombing is what triggered the mass flight of the 4,000 to 5,000 people living there. It killed dozens outright and created a level of terror that just drove the rest of the population to flee for their lives. And even after the village fell, it wasn't over. We have reports from UN observers who were right there on the ground. They described what they saw as systematic looting by Israeli soldiers who were using army trucks to haul away everything of value. This, the UN noted, created a whole new stream of refugees heading north to Lebanon. But the capture of the village wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. For the people of Tarshiha, the events that happened after the main fighting were what really cemented this completely new, transformed reality. And this is where it gets really complicated, because the outcome wasn't the same for everybody. The sources describe a kind of split policy. For the Christian residents of the village, a more moderate policy was used, reportedly because of a sensitivity towards the West. But for the Muslim residents, it was a totally different story. The vast majority of them either fled or were expelled. You see, the displacement wasn't just a single event. It was this cruel cycle. After that initial mass flight, around 700 villagers actually managed to make their way back to their homes by December. But they weren't allowed to stay. By January of 49, over 100 of those returnees were expelled all over again, and their homes were either destroyed or given to new Jewish immigrants. And if you zoom out just a little and look at the villages nearby, you start to see this really stark pattern. Tarshiha resisted, and it was mostly emptied. But look at the Christian villages of Ikrit and Kafr Biram. The sources say they surrendered. They didn't put up a fight. And what was their fate? They were still completely depopulated and eventually destroyed. This suggests there was a determined policy to clear out that whole border region, regardless of resistance. So all of this brings us to the modern era, where the ghost of 1948 still hangs over the village. A village that, officially speaking, doesn't even exist on its own anymore. Fast forward to 1963. The Israeli government makes a big move. What's left of Tarshiha is administratively merged with a brand new Jewish town built next door, called Malot. And this new combined city, Mala Tarshiha, was publicly promoted as the shining example of Jewish-Arab coexistence. But what does that coexistence actually look like on the ground? Well, let's just look at the numbers today. Arab residents, who almost all live in the old Tarshiha part of town, make up just about 22% of the city's population. Think about that. It's a complete flip from the 100% Palestinian village it was back in 1945. And the analysis from the sources we're looking at really gets to the heart of this. It concludes that the merger created a mixed city on paper only. In reality, they describe a situation of de facto segregation, with huge economic and social gaps between the Jewish Ma'alat side and the Arab Tarshiha side. In fact, the analysis uses this incredibly powerful phrase to describe what happened. It calls Tarshiha a swallowed village. It lost its independence, its local government, its economic importance, basically becoming a dependent neighborhood of a city it never asked to join. And that leaves us with this final, really difficult question. The story of Tarshiha is a story of profound transformation, of competing memories, and of a history that is very much still alive and being argued over today. It forces us all to ask, when a community's history is so contested and its very landscape is transformed, who gets to write the next chapter?